Okay, welcome back, guys. Let's continue on chapter 17. Well, in the last chapter, I primarily discussed the difference between managerial accounting and financial accounting that you have learned before. As I said, the biggest difference between managerial and financial accounting is that the financial information prepared in managerial accounting is provided to primarily the internal users. For example, the company's managers and the employees. And another major difference is that in managerial accounting, we focus on manufacturing companies instead of merchandising or service companies. Well, as you can see, for the managers in manufacturing manufacturing companies, especially the managers in manufacturing departments, it is very important for them to know the cost of your products. Well, in the last chapter, I said it is important for you to know the three major parts of the components of a product cost. What are they? The three major parts include: first, direct material; second, direct labor; third, manufacturing overhead. Well, where manufacturing overheads includes any other things other than direct labor or direct materials. So, starting from this chapter, we will learn different methods to accumulate and assign the cost to specific products or specific jobs. Accounting cost accounting system, which will be learned in this chapter and then next chapter. The cost accounting systems measures, record and report the product cost. They are used to accumulate product cost information so that the managers can measure how much it costs to produce each unit of product. And in this chapter, we will learn job order costing. And in the next chapter, we will learn process costing. So, first of all, let me introduce the primary difference between these two different costing methods: job order costing and process costing. Okay, for job order costing, some companies manufacture batches of unique products or provide specialized services. A job order costing system accumulates costs for each unique batch or jobs. A job may be a single unique product or specialized service, or a batch of unique products. An example of a job for building contractor must be construction of a custom house. So an accounting firm might classify a job as preparing a tax return for a client. An example of a batch for a custom baker might be 3 dozens of specialty cupcakes made for a wedding reception. Well, these are unique jobs. So for these types of business, they would like to use job order costing. We need these costing methods to track the cost for specific and unique jobs. So in job order costing, the goal is to keep track of costs associated with specific jobs. Instead, the next costing methods, process costing. Some other companies produce identical units through a series of production steps or process. A process costing system accumulates the costs of each process needed to complete the product over a period of time, instead of assigning the costs to specific jobs. For example, Coca-Cola, which is a soft drinks company, its process may include mixing, bottling, and packaging. Another example is surfboard manufacturing companies. Its process may include sanding, painting, waxing, and packaging, a series of process. Or a medical equipment manufacturer of a blood glucose meter may have processes that include soldering, assembling, and testing. So process costing is used primarily by those companies that produce large quantities of similar products. Some companies may use both job order and process costing. For example, an RV manufacturing company might use process costing for its standard unit, but would use job order costing for custom-made orders. So both job order and process costing system use a 4-step method to track the product cost. Well, these 4 steps are 4 A's that you want to remember. First, accumulate. Second, to assign. Third, to allocate. And lastly, to adjust. And once again, both job order and process costing use a 4-step method. They are to accumulate, to assign, to allocate, and to adjust. So next, well, in this chapter, let's see how these 4 steps are used in job order costing. And in the next chapter, we will learn how to use these 4 steps in process costing. Well, first of all, let's deal with the easiest part. It is materials. Let's see. How do materials and labor costs flow through the job order costing system? A job order costing system tracks costs as raw materials move from storeroom to a production floor, where they're converted into finished goods. Let's consider how a manufacturer uses job order costing to illustrate the process. Here, we will use our fictitious company, still again, the Smart Touch Learning. As you can remember, that this company manufactures touchscreen tablets computers that are preloaded with its e-learning software. Most customers order a batch of customized tablets, and the company considers each customer order as a separate job. So Smart Touch Learning Company uses job order record to document the product cost for each job. And again, the three parts: direct material, three parts. They are direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. In job order costing system, companies must accumulate costs and then assign the cost to each job. Costs are accumulated when the company purchases new materials, incurs direct labor, and incurs manufacturing overheads. The company starts the job cost record when work begins with the job. As the company incurs costs, the company adds cost to the job cost record. That is these sheets. So once the direct material incurs, it records the direct material in this area. And once the related direct labor incurs to this specific job, we record the labor cost to this area, and otherwise, once the manufacturing overheads incurs, we record this part of cost in manufacturing overheads area. So in this chapter, for this specific company, we will focus on only one job, that is job 27. We focus on job 27 within this company to see how these three parts of cost accumulated on the job cost record sheet. Well, again, in a job order costing system, the companies must accumulate the costs and then assign the costs to each job. Costs are accumulated when company purchases raw materials, incurs direct labor, and incurs manufacturing overhead. The company starts the job cost record when the work begins on the job. As Smarter Learning incurs the cost, the company adds costs to the job order record, and the costs are added to the WIP inventory. Here. And when the company finishes a job, the company totals the cost and transfers this total from WIP inventory to finished goods. When the job is finished. And once this part is sold to the customer, it transfers from finished goods to COGS, cost of goods sold. So this slide shows the flow of costs for 3 jobs. Job 27, 20, 28, and 29 that I worked on during the accounting period at Smarter Learning Company. The company worked on many jobs in addition to these 3 jobs during the year. So in this slide, please notice that job 27 and 28 were completed, and their costs were transferred from WIP to FG, from work in process to finished goods. Job 27 was delivered to the customer. So those costs were transferred from finished goods to COGS. But job 29 is the only job that is not complete and still in process. Job 28, as you can see, is complete but not delivered to the customers. So job 27 is the only job completed and sold to the customer. There are 2 aspects to accounting for raw materials: purchasing materials and using materials in production. Well, because raw materials do not have to be used immediately when they are purchased, and the raw materials can be stored for later use. Raw materials purchased accumulate in raw material inventory account until they are assigned to each job. So next, let's look at the recording of both activities: purchasing and using. Okay, first of all, let's see how to record the purchase of raw materials. Transaction 1. During 2020, Smart Touch Learning purchases raw materials for 367,000 on account. So that is pretty much easy for you guys who have taken financial accounting classes. It's pretty much straightforward. We debit raw materials inventory account for $367,000, and because this is on account purchase, we need to credit accounts payable for same amount of money, $367,000. So this is how the T account looks like. Beginning balance. For beginning balance, it has a debit of $70,000 plus transaction 1, debit $367,000. The raw materials subsidiary ledger includes a separate record for each type of materials. So there is a separate ledger account for batteries, processors, cases, and other materials used in production. The subsidiary ledger records show the raw material purchased, used in production, and balance on hand. The use of a subsidiary ledger allows for better control of inventory because it helps track each type of material used in the production. So this slide shows the subsidiary ledger of one type of battery that the company's production uses. The balance of raw material inventory count in the general ledger should always equal the sum of balances in the raw materials subsidiary ledger. Okay, next, let's see. What do we do when the materials are used? So let's assume on January 14, the production team of Job 27 requested materials for this job. And this slide shows the materials requisition for batteries. Well, materials requisition. It is the request to transfer raw materials to the production floor. For example, in this materials requisition sheet, it has several important elements. First of all, the date, as I said, January 14th. The job order 27, which is the job that we will focus on in this chapter, requested by a person's name. Well, let's see. Here, this is the requisition for only batteries. So for item, it lists the batteries. For quantity, unit cost $55 and total cost is quantity times unit cost. We get the total cost. Total cost is $825 for the requisition of raw material, specifically the batteries. So with this request, I mean the materials requisition sheet, these material requisition sheets can be recorded on the job cost record for job 27. So once the materials are used in the production floor, the requisition should be recorded on the job cost record, as you can see. Previously, we have the materials requisition for batteries at total of $825. So here in the job cost record, it needs to record this transaction right here. On January 14th, it requests the direct materials for $825. Okay, let's see. Smartest Learning Company records a summary journal entry at the end of the period for all materials used. To produce the tablets, both direct and indirect materials are used. Let's assume in 2020, the company uses direct materials costing $355,000 and indirect materials costing $17,000. The $17,000 of indirect materials are transferred from raw material inventories to WIP through the manufacturing overhead cost. So as you can see, this is how we deal with this transaction 2. Well, if you can remember, in this T account, this is transaction 1, the purchase of the purchase of raw materials recorded here. And now, parts of the raw materials are used, where $55,000 are direct materials, and another $17,000 is indirect materials. So for direct materials, we need to debit this part to WIP inventory account. WIP inventory account. For the indirect materials, we need to debit manufacturing overhead account. This part. There it is. For credit account, it's definitely the raw materials inventory account. It is here. So this is how we deal with the use of materials. Well, this is materials. Next, let's see what do we do when the labor cost occurs? Well, this slide shows the job cost order for job 27. Direct labor costs are assigned to the job based on the labor time records. Most companies use electronic labor time records to streamline the tracking of labor costs. Employees use the ID cards to swipe in and swipe out in order to enter the job information. The time is automatically added to the appropriate job cost records. If a manual system is used, each employee completes a labor time record that indicates the amount of time spent on each order, on each job. So for the next transaction, the labor is incurred for job 27. Let's see. During 2020, transaction 3, during 2020, Smart Touch Learning incurs total labor costs of $197,000, of which $169,000 is direct labor and $28,000 is indirect labor. So this is also pretty much straightforward, as we learned in financial accounting class. This is how we make the ledger. For the direct labor, we debit this account, work in process inventory. And for indirect labor, we debit manufacturing overheads. Well, as you can see, this is very similar to the use of materials. Let's go back and see the use of materials. See, in use of materials, direct materials is debited to WIP inventory, and for indirect materials, this part is debited to manufacturing overhead. WIP inventory and manufacturing overhead accounts, these two accounts. So, similarly, for labor, same thing. For direct labor, we debit it to WIP inventory. And for indirect labor, we debit this part to manufacturing overhead. Well, the only difference is credit account. For materials, we credit raw materials inventory accounts. But for labor, as you learned in financial accounting class, we need to credit wages payable. So this is how we deal with labor and materials incurred in specific job. And I believe this part is pretty much straightforward. Well, as I said, there are three parts of cost in the production process. They are direct labor, direct materials plus direct labor, as well as manufacturing overheads. We learned how we deal with materials and labor. But next, let's see how to deal with manufacturing overheads in job order costing system. Well, let's assume there are 4 transactions, all about manufacturing overhead. The first transaction, depreciation on manufacturing plant and equipment of 20,000. Second, plant utilities for 7,000. Third, plant insurance previously paid for 6,000. And lastly, plant property tax incurred but not yet paid for $5,000. Well, this is what you did. In making the entries. As you can see, overheads includes a variety of costs that the company cannot easily trace to individual jobs. For example, it is impossible to say how much of the cost of a plant utility is related to job 27, because manufacturing overhead cannot be easily traced to each job. The company treats manufacturing overhead differently than direct materials and direct labors. So this company allocates overhead cost to specific jobs. The accounting for the allocation of overhead cost is a 3-step process and occurs at 3 different points in the accounting circle. First, calculating the predetermined overhead allocation rates before the period. Second, allocate overhead during the period. And lastly, to adjust overhead at the end of the period. So today I will show you how to calculate the predetermined overhead allocation rates before the period and how to allocate overhead during the period. Well, in the next class, I will discuss what to do to adjust at the end of the period. Okay, first of all, before the period, we need to calculate the predetermined overhead allocation rate. Well, as you know, the most accurate allocation can be made only when total overhead costs are known, and that is not until the end of the period. But the managers cannot wait that long for product cost information because it is important that they have an understanding of how much each product is costing. So, predetermined overhead allocation rate is calculated before the period begins. Companies use the predetermined rate to allocate estimated overhead cost to each job. This rate, the predetermined overhead allocation rate, is based on, as you can see, based on two factors. First, total estimated overhead cost for the period. First, total estimated overhead cost. And second, total estimated quantity of the overhead allocation pays. As you can see, these two numbers are all estimated, not that accurate. So, well, I would like to say that in the future homework or in the assignments, these two numbers are directly given in the question. You do not have to estimate by yourself. These two parts are directly given in the question because it is estimated, right? Well, let me explain in detail. The key to allocating indirect manufacturing costs to specific job is to identify a workable manufacturing overhead allocation base. The allocation base is a denominator that links overhead costs to the products. Ideally, the allocation base is the primary cost driver of a manufacturing overhead. As the phrase implies, a cost driver is the primary factor that causes a cost. Well, for example, the cost of electricity to operate machinery increases with increased machine use. Therefore, the cost driver for electricity is the amount of machine usage, and the allocation base would be machine hours. This is a relationship between the overhead cost and the allocation base. The higher the quantity of the allocation base, the higher the overhead cost, and vice versa. Traditionally, manufacturing companies have used the following as the cost driver. First, direct labors or direct labor hours, direct labor costs, or machine hours. They are used for different environments, for labor-intensive production environments, or for the machine-intensive production environments. Let's see this example. At the end of 2019, that means at the end of the last accounting period, SmartTouch Learning estimated that total overhead cost for next year would be $68,000. As you can see, it is an estimated amount. An estimated overhead is $68,000, and direct labor costs would total $117. So using this information, the predetermined overhead allocation rate is calculated as follows. We use total estimated overhead cost, which is $68,000, divided by total estimated quantity of the allocation base, which is $170. It is 40% of direct labor cost. So, in other words, in this case, for job 27, we would like to assign 40% of the overall manufacturing overhead. So during the periods, we need to allocate 40% of the direct labor. Let's see. As jobs are completed in 2020, SmartTouch Learning will allocate overhead costs using the predetermined overhead rate allocation rates. Let's assume the total direct labor for job 27 is $1,250, and the predetermined overhead allocation rate is 40% of direct labor cost. So the allocated manufacturing overhead cost is 40% of direct labor. %40 of the direct labor. That is $500. So this amount is the allocated manufacturing overhead cost. And let's use this job 27 as an example. The total direct labor cost is 1,250 and the predetermined overhead allocation rate is 40%. This company produces 15 tablets. So we use the total cost of goods manufactured divided by total units produced. We get the unit cost per tablet. Well, this slide shows the allocated manufacturing overhead cost of $500 on job cost records. The cost summary section of the completed job cost records for the Central College bookstore order shows the job 27 cost Smartest Learning a total of $4,500 and divided by 15 units, we can get the unit cost of $300. So a quick recap. For direct materials and direct labors, they are pretty much straightforward. For direct labors and direct materials, we debit this part to WIP inventories. Well, and as I just discussed, we use the predetermined overhead allocation rate to determine how much is the manufacturing overhead. We need to determine this amount to be 40% of direct labor cost, which is $500. So this $500 comes from here. For direct materials, 2,070 $750 comes from the total of these three use of direct materials. For the labors, let's see. The total cost of direct labors for $1,250 comes from here. The total of these 3 Qs of direct labor. So this is the summary of the job cost records. Okay, the last transaction of this class. Let's assume Smart Touch Learning's total direct labor cost for 2020 is $169,000 using an overhead allocation rate of 40%. Manufacturing overhead is 67,600. So we need to make the journal entry like this. For the debit account, we need to debit WIP inventory. And for the credit accounts, also, it is manufacturing overhead. We need to credit manufacturing overhead account for same amount of money. Well, this is what we do before the period and during the period. In the next class, I will show you what do we do at the end of the period. That is the step of adjusting. So now let me see if you have any questions. Oh, by the way, this is the end of this class. Let me stop recording.